Alright, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to create our main widget that will have other different sub-widgets, things like our player inventory, our minimap, and all that stuff. And of course, if you're new to widgets, I'll give you the basic rundown of the widget editor and what to expect. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So in our content underscore main, we're going to right click and add a new folder. And this is going to be called widgets. So all of our widgets are going to be stored inside of this folder. And so now we can go ahead and right click and add our very first widget. So under the create advanced asset, we have user interface at the very bottom. And down here at the very bottom, we have a widget blueprint. So go ahead and click that. And now you're going to see it's asking us to pick a root widget for our new widget blueprint. And we're just going to use this default user widget. And this is pretty much the same widget that we select every single time we create a new widget inside of this course. So just click on that. And now we can go ahead and name this widget. We're going to name this W underscore main widget. So this is going to be our main widget or our main HUD. That's going to have things like our minimap, our hotbar, our inventory, player chat, all that sort of stuff. So double click and open this up. And if you are new to the widget blueprint editor, essentially how it works is you have your widget, this little viewport where you can scroll in and out. This is where you see all the UI elements, things like your little minimap here, hotbar, all that stuff is going to be displayed right here. So this is like the little viewport. Then over here on our palette, we have things like buttons, images, sliders, all sorts of stuff that we can use to create our user interface. And then here is where we have our hierarchy. So, you'll have a image that has a button underneath it and maybe a slider. So this is where you'd add all those different palette items. You can see every time you select a different item inside of this widget. So say if we add a button here, if I select the button, you can see that we have various details related to the button. Things like the color of the button, the style. You can set the button to an image. All that stuff is in the details panel here. So let me just delete that real quick. And then the very last thing that you really need to know about your blueprint editor here is this graph. So you have the graph and the designer. So the designer is where you design what the widget looks like, what the UI looks like. And the graph is where you program in the backend. So this is where you program in the actual functionality for things like buttons, sliders, all that sort of stuff. And you can see that this is pretty much just a blueprint node where you can add various different blueprint nodes, functions, variables, and so on. So that's the basic rundown for widgets. You're going to get a lot of widget experience throughout this course. I think we make a total of 50 or so different widgets. You're going to get really familiar with the widget editor and how it all works. So this is our main widget. What we want to create inside of our main widget is we want to add a canvas panel. So canvas panel, if we search up here in the palette, we can search for canvas panel. And you can see every time you hover over one of these different items inside of this palette, you can see we have this description. So canvas panel is a designer-friendly panel that allows widgets to be laid out in arbitrary locations, so just randomly across the screen. And so Canvas is a great widget for manual layout, but bad when you want to procedurally generate widgets and so on. So we're going to go ahead and add this Canvas panel to our main widget. And so now you can see we have sort of this screen, and this is sort of what our screen is going to look like, or what our UI is going to look like when we add this to our screen. Right now it's empty, we don't have anything in it. So let's go ahead and just add a simple text. So if we type in text, we have this little text here. And you can see when we drag it onto the canvas panel, we can either drag it onto the canvas panel here, or on to the canvas panel like so, on the actual screen. Okay, so either way we'll do the same thing. Now you can see when we added that text here, we can drag it around on the screen so we can position it wherever we want. We can also take these little scaling boxes and scale it around. You see that doesn't actually change the scaling of the text. So we want to change the scaling. All you have to do is either select the text box here or here. And in the details, we have all the way down here under the appearance, we have things like the color and opacity. And under the font, we can change things like the font. You can actually import your own custom fonts if you want to. And then we have things like the size, so we can change the size of the font. Then over here at the text, we can actually change the text, the actual text side of here. So let's change this to main HUD or main widget, basically to let us know that we have this main HUD on our screen. What we want to also do is we want to anchor this. So anchors are these little star things that you see right here. So right now we don't see any anchors because that's when we select a certain item. For example, this text. You can see that the anchor for this text right now is this top left corner. Basically what an anchor does is it anchors certain UI elements. So for example, this text. If we wanted this text to be anchored in the corner, we would want to change the anchoring to anchor right here. And all that anchor does is it keeps certain UI elements, so certain like windows, text, things like that, images, and it keeps it in the general area that you want it. If you're playing your game on a different monitor, on a different resolution or aspect ratio, an anchor is going to try and anchor all the widgets to the proper areas. That way it will look sort of the same, or the widgets will be in the same places, depending on if you're playing this on a different resolution, on a different aspect ratio, on a different monitor, or whatnot. So to change our anchor here, to anchor it down at the bottom, over in the details panel we can select under the anchors. You can see we have a bunch of different presets, so we want to choose this bottom left anchor. Okay, so compile and save that. So now we have a very simple main widget that just has some text so that we can see if we've actually added this main widget to our screen. Later on we'll add things like a little mini map here, health bar, and we'll have our player inventory here in the center. But right now let's go ahead and just add this main HUD or main widget to our player's screen so that when we hit play we see this main HUD text. To go ahead and do that, we're going to need to add 2 new blueprint classes. So in our main folder, go into your blueprints. You want to right click and add a new blueprint. So under the blueprints we can select the blueprint class, and what we want to add is a player controller. So go ahead and select that, and we want to name this to survival game underscore PC or survival game player controller. All this player controller does is it's going to handle different inputs as well as the widgets. So let's go ahead and just open this up. Now sometimes if you create a new blueprint class, you're going to get this data only blueprint view where it's just a long list of the default values of this blueprint. And so if you want to add script or variables, you want to click on this open full blueprint editor, and that will get the actual blueprint view. Now if you open up the blueprint or the survival game player controller, your main view should look like this. So we have a viewport here. So it looks very similar to our character class, but basically the main thing we're only going to be using in this player controller is this event graph. We don't actually use like this viewport or anything. We don't set like a character up through here. The only thing we're using here is this graph to program different logic. So in here we can go ahead and delete the tick, and off the event begin play we're going to create our widget and add it to our screen. So off of here we want to do a switch has authority. And so the switch has authority, everything off of the authority, so every node that's hooked up to this is going to execute on the server. Everything off of this node, off of the remote, is going to execute on the client. So we want to create our widgets on the client because the server is not a player, because we're going to have a dedicated server. So we don't need a widget for our server. And in fact, if you were to create it that way, it would throw up an error. So off of the remote here, we can do a create widget. So this will go ahead and create our main widget. So let's select under the class our W underscore main widget, and it wants to get an owning player or a reference to a controller. So just drag off of here and do get reference to self, because this is a player controller class, so we can do this reference to ourself. Compile and save that. Now we're not done, we have to add this widget to our viewport. So off this return value, what we want to do is actually drop it here on the graph and promote this to a variable, because we want a variable or reference to our main widget so that we can use it later on when we start adding some more Blueprint logic. So just name this variable to main widget reference, or main widget ref for short. And now off of here we can do a add to viewport and compile and save that. So now if we go ahead and hit play, you're going to see that we don't have this added to our viewport yet. And why exactly is that? It's because we need to actually assign this player controller to our character. So right now we don't have a player controller when we hit play, and that's because we need to add a game mode class. So in our Blueprints folder, we want to add a new folder, and we can just name this to game modes. So open that folder and right click. We're going to add a new Blueprint class, and we want to add this game mode base. So right now we're not going to really get too in depth into the game mode. We're just going to use it to add our player controller. So just name this game mode to survival game underscore GM for game mode. And then if we open this up in our game mode here under the class defaults, we have things like our player pawn class and our player controller class. Now really quickly, in our first person map, we actually have a game mode in this map. And the way that we can view that or find that is if we open up a window and go to world settings, click that window. You can see in the world settings it adds a new world settings window, and I usually dock this here right next to the details. So if you add it, it should add here in the details panel, but you can see in the world settings we have a game mode, and our current game mode that we have is this first person game mode. So if you expand this selected game mode, you can see that we have a default pawn class, our first person character, and a player controller class, which is just a default player controller. So we want to set it to this survival game mode, and we want to set our pawn and our controllers. So with our game mode, survival game mode selected, we can go ahead and do this. Click on this little arrow, and it will set it to our survival game mode that we have selected. Now we want to set our pawn to our first person character. So if we hit the default pawn here, we want to set it to our BP first person character. Otherwise, if we were to hit play with no pawn, we wouldn't have our first person character to play as. So we have our character, and then we want to add our player controller, our survival game player controller. So just hit that drop down and hit our survival game player controller. So now we have our little basic game mode set up. We have the character assigned and the controller assigned. Now we should be able to see that main widget or that main HUD on our screen when we hit play. So let's go ahead and hit play. So now you can see we have our main HUD, our main widget on our screen, and that is being added through our player controller class. So whenever we are playing our game, at the very beginning inside of our player controller, we create that main widget and we add it to the viewport. And all that's inside of our main widget is just that main HUD text. Okay, so very simple widget, nothing really too fancy about it right now. And so in our next lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to add a player inventory widget that will be inside of this main widget. So with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next lecture.